I'd like to share with you a few interesting games that are absolutely worth playing. In this video we'll be talking about the period of 2010s. Conceptually, I'll be covering once famous, cult or simply excellent titles that for various reasons have already managed to be somewhat forgotten today. Whether it's because there were no sequels, if it was a series, or because of new trends in the industry, or even because it's nearly impossible to get a licensed copy of the game without unnecessary complications. So in order to not let them fade into oblivion, I decided to make these kind of videos. If the games from the list are still available on modern digital platforms, I'll make sure to clarify that. The 2010s themselves are actually a pretty fascinating and even defining period for the video game industry. For the first time, indie developers appeared in the form we usually imagine them today. Small studios of fewer than 10 people who, driven by pure enthusiasm, created unconventional projects. The first games of this trend were The Binding of Isaac and Bastion, both released in 2011. At the same time, big corporations were gaining momentum fast, because what was once a niche field for bedroom programmers suddenly started bringing in serious money. By around 2015, the mid-tier sector would practically disappear, and as a response to this corporization, the indie scene truly took shape. So that this video doesn't turn into just a list of tiny indie games, I'll try to keep some balance. That's all for the intro. Now let's move on to our actual titles that are definitely worth playing. The first game on our list is Split Second, an amazing, spectacular arcade racing game. In the 2000s, so-called destructive racing games quickly rose up to popularity with series like Burnout and Flatout. Those stood out from traditional racing games thanks to their sheer level of action and their chaotic gameplay. Naturally, the industry tried to replicate the success of those games, and Split Second is one of those attempts. However, this title isn't just a plain clone or a follower. It brought its own ideas and its own vision of what racing in total chaos should feel like. By concept, we are participants of a fictional TV show where we compete for fame and rewards. It's kind of an allusion to a Hollywood blockbuster by someone like Michael Bay, where everything explodes, crashes and falls apart almost every second. That's actually what the game is built around. During races, through tricks like jumps, drifting and so on, we build up a power bar that allows us to activate special triggers, objects or spots on the tracks that explode or completely reshape the environment. Is there an opponent ahead of you that you can catch up to? With the press of a button, a helicopter drops an explosive barrel right on them. Have you fallen behind the others? Blow up a bridge ahead to cut them off. Struggling to handle a sharp turn? Collapse a tower that opens up a brand new route on the track. The gameplay is pure non-stop action. The game doesn't let you breathe even for a second. Something always happening. Something always exploding. The pace is insane and you can't just calmly drive to the finish line, because you never know what's going to happen in the very next moment. That's actually where the game's title comes from. The overall atmosphere, to be honest, feels more like kart games, for example Mario Kart or Crash Team Racing. In those games too, you always need to stay on edge, ready for anything to fly at you at any second. Only instead of bombs, in Split Second, literally everything around you explodes. What's most captivating in Split Second is just how dramatically the environment changes, because the triggers can either just give your car a small shake or completely transform the entire surrounding landscape, which forces the player to adapt to new conditions. I literally had my breath taken away when I watched a massive bridge collapse right before my eyes for the first time. That's something you have to experience for yourself. It's genuinely impressive. On top of that, the game offers a relatively solid visual component, which still holds up today, if you don't count the overload of cheap special effects, bloom and all that stuff, as well as pretty interesting car handling. Despite the arcade nature of this game, the cars feel good and have a specific sense of weight when you go into a drift. On top of it all, we also have a kind of progression system with TV-style seasons, different challenges where you need to farm stars, and the ability to unlock new cars. It's a shame that the whole game can be completed in about 5 to 7 hours, but during that time it delivers a ton of enjoyment. You can still buy it today, it's available on Steam, and if someone has a PSP, you can even play it on handheld. Unfortunately, the developer studio went bankrupt after the release of Split Second, so it's unlikely we'll ever see a sequel. But as a standalone product, it's a very unique racing game that managed to create its own mechanics and actually implement them at a solid level. For me personally, Split Second stands on the same tier as the already mentioned Flatout and Burnout, so I can definitely recommend trying this title as well. Now let's talk about the relatively well-known Magicka, which at one time was a real phenomenon in the world of the video game industry. It's hard to describe this title because honestly it's easier just to play it, but in terms of concept, it's basically a kind of comedic hack and slash with a focus on magic, as you might have guessed from the name. Instead of the traditional grinding system typical for this genre, Magicka plays more through action and diverse spellcasting. Of course, we still have progression and new items, but the most interesting part is the magic itself. In both installments, we have 8 main elements that can be combined in different ways. These can work as elemental combos, for example, fire and water make steam, as well as combination by form, like beams of force, streams of fire, and so on. As a result, you can generate dozens or even hundreds of different combinations. But that's still not all. Beyond the spellcasting, the game is packed with a lot of humor, starting from the pretty funny quests and ending with cool secrets like the M60 machine gun. And of course, all of this is topped off with a 4-player co-op mode. I remember that at the time this game, thanks to its uniqueness, became one of the biggest co-op sensations after Left 4 Dead. At least the first game did. Among the drawbacks, the biggest issue is the technical state of the game. Players complain that on PC, the first part is either hard to launch because of the Paradox launcher or simply unplayable due to constant crashes. Things are a bit better with the sequel, but the servers have long since been shut down, so if you plan on playing with friends, you'll have to do some serious tinkering, like setting up local networks through third-party software. Besides Steam, the sequel is also sold for PlayStation, and the game is available in subscription services as well. Overall, these are excellent titles. Unique, interesting, and honestly hard to fully describe it in words. They're just games that you need to play. And completing them won't even take that much time, roughly 5 to 8 hours per playthrough. And now let's move on to the shooter Bulletstorm. If I had to describe this game somehow, I'd say it's like a first-person version of Gears of War combined with the world of Borderlands. A dynamic adventure in the style of Duke Nukem, but with a few interesting twists. In particular, this shooter manages to solve one of the biggest problems of its genre, creativity. By the 2000s, a typical shooter with badass muscle-bound guys was already a cliché, let alone today. So Bulletstorm would hardly stand out from its competitors if not for some of its unique features. First of all, it doesn't play like a regular shooter, but more like an arcade game with a scoring system. You earn points for more creative enemy takedowns, kicking someone off a ledge, blowing up a group of enemies at once, or impaling them on spikes. The more brutal the kill, the more points you get, and those points are spent on upgrades and ammunition. Beyond just interacting with the environment, the game gives us other tools to flex our creativity. There's the good old kick, just like in classic Duke Nukem, which I already mentioned, a whip that's let you interact with enemies and objects, and of course, a pretty fun arsenal of weapons. One of my personal favorites is the sniper rifle that lets you control the bullet mid-flight. Maybe this mechanic existed somewhere before, but Bulletstorm was the first game I ever saw it implemented. By the way, another cool fact about Bulletstorm is that it was developed by the Polish studio People Can Fly. Some might know them for the original Painkiller, while the wider audience knows them mainly thanks to Fortnite. On top of that, they also worked on porting Gears of War, which explains the similarities with those tough guys in metal armor. Otherwise, this is a classic example of 2010s. Tons of special effects, insane pacing, and some really interesting mechanics. If you're feeling like shooting stuff but you're tired from typical shooters, I recommend giving Bulletstorm a try. It's still easily available for purchase on Steam, and the only downside is that the game will most likely never get a sequel, even though the ending set things up with a cliffhanger. Next up is Ryse Son of Rome, unexpectedly one of my absolute favorite games. I won't go into every single nuance, but let's focus on the main things. The core feature here is the setting. There are relatively plenty of games about ancient Rome, but the majority of them are strategy titles. Action games about Rome, however, you could count on the fingers of one hand. And Ryse isn't about historical Rome, it's mixed with elements of mythical divinity, which creates a pretty unique atmosphere. From a pure gameplay perspective, it's an action game centered around counterattacks, similar to Assassin's Creed, Mad Max or Sleeping Dogs, though with a much deeper focus on combat itself. In those other games, countering is just one mechanic. Here it's basically everything. So we've got blocking, counterattacks, rolling, and on top of that, insanely spectacular and brutal executions. Honestly, I never got tired of watching those animations. What's more interesting, the game was originally being developed for Kinect, the early VR-like experiment blended with Nintendo Wii technology, where the device would scan the player's movements and mirror them on screen. So Ryse Son of Rome was first conceived as the first-person slasher, only later was it turned into the version we see today. That's actually why the game has so many executions, and you can even unlock more of them with experience. Also, we have the stunning graphics, which still look impressive even today, though you do have to deal with some performance issues, because even on modern PCs, the game still can drop frames. The sad part is that we'll never see a sequel, because no one really cares. So if you got tired of the campaign, you'll just have to jump into Coliseum mode instead. Other than that, this is a phenomenal game, one I strongly recommend to try out. Long before we had Beat Saber, there were two Audiosurf games. I feel like some of you watching will remember this forgotten gem, while others who don't know, let me explain. It belongs to so-called rhythm games, genre which didn't become popular until recently. And if to be precise, rhythm games first appeared back in the 90s, but only became popular relatively later. These titles take the concept of music playback and integrate it directly into the gameplay. Some rhythm games require you to dance, others just to click in time with the music. Some use their own soundtrack, but Audiosurf stands out because it plays through your own music. You load up any song you want and the game builds up a track out of it, a route you need to ride along with your shuttle, dodging bad blocks and collecting the good ones, which reward you with points. As is typical for the genre, the track responds to the music itself, the beats, the speed, the obstacles. Unfortunately, I can't show you directly what this looks like, because copyright would immediately hit me, but I think you can easily look up examples if you're really interested. Potentially both Audiosurf games can give you an endless number of levels, because new music is always being released. Since both games are available for purchase on Steam, it's also a fantastic pick if you own a Steam Deck, because a few people have already figured out ways to play custom tracks on the handheld. So this is yet another low-pressure, chill game, perfect if you would like to play it on your couch. Unexpectedly, let's talk about LA Noire from the world-famous Rockstar Games. Even though the game is still quite popular today, I still decided to give it some attention. This title is rarely mentioned and in my opinion, it doesn't deserve such neglect. LA Noire takes us to Los Angeles in 1947. Most of the game will be playing as police officer Cole Phelps, who investigates all sorts of crimes. To keep the player engaged, the game moves us through different departments: traffic, homicide and so on. Genre-wise, it's a third-person action-adventure with a conditionally open world. I say conditionally because most of the time you'll just be traveling from the point A to the point B, and the city itself feels fairly empty. But this isn't a huge problem, since the game doesn't focus on that aspect. The story is what matters here. The investigation process is built in a very organic way, searching for clues, questioning witnesses, interrogating suspects. Most of the cases feel believable and interesting. It's a bit tricky for me to show the actual gameplay, since I don't want to spoil anything, but the game really does a fantastic job of generating that detective and police officer experience. Aside from the investigations, we'll sometimes get into shootouts or drive through the city, but don't expect the same quality level as Red Dead Redemption. Those mechanics exist only for variety. The best and at the same worst feature of LA Noire is the dialogue system, especially the facial animations. The point is, we'll often try to provoke people into reacting. During interrogations, for example, you might push a suspect with something like, "Hey, so you killed your wife." Naturally, NPCs will react to accusations. The problem is, the facial animations are way too exaggerated. On one hand, that makes it easy to read people's reactions, but on the other hand, it breaks immersion and basically gives away the right dialogue options. This mechanic is one of the biggest dividers. Some players absolutely love LA Noire, which others can't stand it. But overall, this is a rare little gem that perfectly captures its era and the feeling of the classic detective story. The title is still sold on Steam, and on consoles there was even a re-release that upgraded visuals to match the PC version. So you shouldn't have any problems finding a copy. Tired of Forza Horizon? Can't stand another Need for Speed? The crew didn't hook you, but you still want to drive around in an open world? Don't worry, there is a solution. Test Drive Unlimited. The first game was released in 2006, with the sequel arriving in 2011. The second one is generally considered the better of the two, so let's focus on that. Test Drive Unlimited 2 can surprise you with a pretty big car park. 101 licensed vehicles. Sure, Gran Turismo 7 has over 500, but back then 100 cars was an impressive number. You've got sports cars, SUVs, and you can even ride motorcycles. The driving takes place on the island of Oahu, carried over from the first game, and they also added Ibiza. You're as free as a bird. Go where you want. Naturally, there are different events and different licenses, and in the second game, surprisingly enough, there's even a somewhat decent storyline. Graphically, it still holds up, because making racing games isn't that hard, so even now it looks acceptable. Not on the level of modern titles, but not painful pixel soup either. There's solid lighting, weather effects, high quality car models, reflection on surfaces, the usual package that makes for a decent racing experience. The problem is, the world itself is pretty empty. Sure, you can drive where you want, but outside of races, there isn't much to do. I wouldn't call it a major drawback though. It's typical for the genre when you mix it with open worlds. The bigger issue is buying it nowadays. Finding both games is difficult. You basically have to go sailing 7 seas. The first, Test Drive Unlimited, was even on PSP. I tried it myself back in the day, and for a handheld it was genuinely great. On Steam you can find a follow-up, Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown, but the reviews are terrible. Players complain about always needing an online connection, while the servers constantly don't work. And overall, it looks more like a cash grab attempt to milk a once popular franchise. But back in its time, Test Drive Unlimited was an important step forward for its genre, and today it can still be a great choice if you're running weaker hardware, or if you just need something to play on your work laptop. Up next is another shooter called The Darkness. The first game was released back in 2007 on consoles, and today it's pretty difficult to get your hands on. But the 2012 sequel did come out on PC as well. Story-wise, we play as Jackie Estacado, who in the beginning of the original game was almost killed by his mafia godfather. The godfather thought our main character would betray him. He would have succeeded too if not for the interference of the Darkness, a demonic force that has protected Jackie's bloodline, if you can call it that. In the sequel, Jackie himself has already become the head of the mafia, and he managed to find common ground with his power. But if things had ended happily, we wouldn't have gotten a continuation, so of course everything goes downhill. As for the gameplay, this is one of those now rare brutal shooters with supernatural abilities. The Darkness manifests as 2 serpent-like tentacles plus a minion that helps us in combat. They let us strike enemies in melee, use the environment as the weapon, tear apart bad guys, even restore health. I can't show most of the juiciest finishers here because YouTube wouldn't be happy, but trust me, the game is really violent. Jackie himself can wield firearms too, even with full-on akimbo options. There's also a progression system to upgrade our powers. Overall, the Darkness feels a lot like a Bulletstorm. Same kind of stylized graphics, same emphasis on arcade-style points farming, but the difference is that here the story is much better developed. It's way more interesting to follow the characters and their arcs, because you basically got an entire soap opera built around Jackie's love life. There's even a hidden ending. All in all, this is a very solid shooter, especially considering that they just don't make them like this anymore. The sequel is available on Steam, so I definitely recommend giving it a try. And that's all for my list of 8 great games from the 2000s. Honestly, I had at least 4 more contenders picked up for this video, but I decided to save them for the future, if people end up enjoying this one. Besides, I get the feeling most gamers today are more interested in modern titles, at least partially because of the visuals. But to be honest, the video game industry is full of fascinating titles across all time periods, and there's always plenty to talk about.